Tonight at City Hall, Providence lawmakers will formally introduce one of the most consequential housing proposals the city has debated in years. Supporters call it rent stabilization, a way to slow rapid rent increases and give tenants predictability in one of the tightest rental markets in the country. Opponents warn it could discourage investment, reduce housing supply, and create long-term consequences the city can't easily undo. This debate isn't theoretical. It's happening now. It's affecting tens of thousands of Providence renters and property owners, and it could reshape the city's housing market for decades. Today, we're joined by Providence City Councilor AnderBois to discuss rent stabilization in Providence.
Bartholomew Town.
And we thank our sponsors, including Newport Film. Visit newportfilm.com for all of the latest screening details. Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Tonight at Providence City Hall, as mentioned, a major discussion will be formalized, and that's the conversation around rent stabilization. Look, there are a lot of different takeaways from a proposal that was introduced by the Providence City Council earlier this week, at least introduced to the public for review. It'll be formally introduced tonight at the council chambers. And this is one of those scenarios that it is, as I described in the open, it is really the potential for reshaping what has been a completely runaway housing market in Providence right now. I don't know the last time any of you have had experience trying to, even just taking a look on Zillow or something like that, or trying to take a look at options for renters. It is no doubt right now way beyond the scope of what I think any reasonable person would deem reasonable rent. And this stabilization proposal, not rent control, but rent stabilization. And there's a difference there that we're going to get to in just a moment. Let me give you some of the key provisions of the proposed ordinance that's going to be introduced tonight. Coming up in just a matter of moments, we'll speak with Providence City Councilor AnderBois, who is behind this, or I should say is for this rent stabilization proposal. Here are some of the key takeaways, though. This ordinance is going to cap annual rent increases for most units at about 4%, all right? So now you see some of these units, you hear about it. I've seen it and experienced it myself here in Providence, where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you end up with like an 80% rent increase or something insane. Like, really, this is actually happening in some of the unregulated spots. But more than anything, that's rare. No doubt, though, commonplace 10, 15, 20% rent increases. Again, kind of commonplace, not just anecdotal. It's happening in real time. And this ordinance would provide for a 5-member rent board that would have the authority to review some of these rent hikes. They could hear feedback from both tenants and landlords. They could roll back some of the illegal increases and also impose recommendations for fines for violators. Now, there would be some units that are exempt from that 4% cap. That includes new construction. It's about usually in typical rent stabilization markets, it's like a 15-year period. Okay. Also, owner-occupied buildings with only a few units. If you got 3 units, you got a family in there, that's a different story. And your family in there, owner-occupied. And then also some regulated affordable housing. Okay. Landlords could still go to the rent board and say, hey, wait a minute, we need an increase above 4%, but that would only be to, quote, ensure a fair return or cover major cost increases. Now, the mayor, Brett Smiley, he has long signaled that he is not a rent stabilization, rent control proponent. He said that back when I moderated the debate for Providence mayor back in 2022, and he said it consistently on the record along the way. So in order for this thing to be passed as written, it would need a supermajority, that's 10 of 15 councilors, for it to be overridden, for that veto likely coming from Mayor Smiley to be overridden. Okay. Now, the council, their leadership is saying, and they're correct to say, and it's completely one of the most obvious statements that anybody could make, and debating it is ridiculous. They're arguing that, look, Providence is facing one of the fastest growing rental markets in the country. Completely true. And this is leading to people being priced out, long-term residents being priced out, and it's creating a psychological element as well. Even if you're not right now being pushed out of your unit, there's a feeling of insecurity for renters, okay? And so without rent stabilization right now, there's a feeling of a lack of not only affordability, but predictability. That's bad news for Providence, okay? Again, there are people who are pro this. There are people who are opposed to it, and I'm going to give you some of the key arguments that we've heard. Again, if you're in favor of this rent control, rent stabilization model, and again, here in Providence, it would be a rent stabilization model. Rent control is like, you think about those like pre-World War II buildings in New York City, right? And you hear these stories of someone's had an apartment since 1946 or something, and they're able to continue on with rent-controlled pricing, okay? Because it's a super old building and it's built into a particular element of the system. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about rent stabilization, also deployed in New York City, okay? And there have been interesting positives, and there have been some things that have been concerning about the implementation of rent stabilization. Say that 100 times fast in New York. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation here. I'll also ask Councilor AnderBois about her take on that. But look, the arguments are pretty simple. If you impose rent control or rent stabilization or anything in that department, right, it's going to help keep rents more predictable and affordable. It's going to help control a rapidly growing rental price. We're not seeing here in Providence, okay, and really statewide, a ton of housing production, but we're seeing rapid rent growth. That's a recipe for disaster. Anybody who's a renter in Providence knows that. And it's just not sustainable from any position. You talk about economic development, you talk about anything. If people can't afford to live here, what's the point? Especially those people who we really need to inject into our city right now or retain in our city, young professionals that are, and when I say professionals, I'm not talking about people who are making a ton of money. I'm talking about people who get up in the morning and go to work. All right. And introducing more people like that into our ecosystem is what we need, not pricing them out. All right. And the other argument is a key and fundamental one, which is that rent stabilization can protect vulnerable populations. Okay. So you've got people who are choosing, in a low income sense, they're choosing between rent and other necessities sometimes. And this displaces seniors, service workers, families on fixed incomes, totally 100% happening in real time in our city. Those are the arguments for it. Now, the opponents, look, they say this is going to reduce housing supply by the discouraging of investment, okay? And critics have said time and time again that you cap rents, it gives investors lower potential returns, and the development of new units is less attractive, okay? And there's been studies like in St. Paul, Minnesota, that do show there's been a sharp drop in new construction after strict rent controls were imposed. That's why you've got to have, by the way, the carve-outs, the exemptions, that piece. You can go to the board and say, I put a bunch of money into my unit. I need more than 4% on this from an increase standpoint, and that rent board could review it to allow for some exceptions so the ecosystem is not totally one-sided, okay? Another argument against this is that it distorts market signals. It doesn't create any new units. It only limits the increases on the existing one, and that can lead to shortages if demands continue to rise and that production goes down, right? There's always talk about quality and maintenance concerns and administrative costs, things like that. And also, a real problem is that the rent caps may not benefit those who are most in need, the most vulnerable populations. It may miss them. So those are some of the pros and cons, if you will, or I should say the in favor, not in favor mindset. Again, I think it's real important to separate rent control from rent stabilization. I've heard that a lot around town. I've heard that even in some discussions that I've had on background with some leadership. This is not rent control. It is rent stabilization. It's a different program. And we can look to New York. We can look to a lot of different cities to get some takeaways, and I will certainly bring those up to Councilor AnderBois here on Bartholomew Town coming up in just a matter of moments. And we do appreciate you trusting us here. We know you get a lot of choices, and we appreciate you making Bartholomew Town one of yours. And we also appreciate our supporters like Navigant Credit Union, who have been a staple of the local business community here in southern New England for more than 108 years. Fast forward to today, Navigant, they're a $3.4 billion institution. They serve more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. And since their founding in 1915, that mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Keyword there, community. Learn more about that at navigantcu.org. Okay, my conversation with Councilor Sue AnderBois on this major housing move in Providence. That's right now here on Bartholomew Town. Councilor AnderBois, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I should say. I feel like it was pretty recent that we were on discussing your bid for lieutenant governor. And look, separate and apart from that is your work on the council And one of the major challenges that the Providence City Council has been facing for several years now is the affordability crisis. So right out of the gate, as we look at rent stabilization being introduced tonight on Thursday, January 22nd at City Hall, kind of going to the macro first, just your summary as a Providence City Councilor of your experience with the affordability crisis in Providence.
Yeah, so we're being hit with a real, and have been for quite some time, with affordability crisis here in Providence. And it's not just housing, it's all sorts of things. The prices of everything has been going up. Housing is a huge component of that. And I think the council is looking at, and I know I'm particularly looking at, what are all the tools we can bring to the table on this? So rent stabilization, obviously a key one. We're introducing that tonight. I'm a co-sponsor on the ordinance. But we've also been doing quite a number of things to address the housing crisis in the city as well. So really not seeing this as a silver bullet, but we're also seeing, and we're seeing a doubling down on this. Energy prices are going up. We're seeing the governor back down on our clean energy commitments, which is the exact wrong direction to go if we want to see our energy rates stabilize over time. We're seeing a doubling down on our reliance on natural gas. We're seeing food prices go up with the federal government. We're seeing with the tariffs, all of the prices of everything going insane. So we really need to do what we can for our residents here in the city to help stabilize and lower costs where we can. Yeah,
and right now that fits in really as part of really a pillar of any affordability agenda has to be housing, especially in Rhode Island and especially in Providence right now. One of the quote unquote, depending on how you look at it, one of some people say the hottest market. That's usually if you're coming from the standpoint of profit, making a profit off of the market.
Yeah.
It's really not that hot if you're somebody who is looking for predictability or stability in the rental market in Providence. So this is not, as I've emphasized in the opening segment today, this isn't rent control. This is rent stabilization, primarily a 4% rent increase cap in most, or if not many, units in Providence. How did you arrive at the plan as currently constituted? Was there anything behind the scenes that you, as a council, were working with developers or anybody else that may be typically opposed to rent stabilization, that you made compromises in the plan that will be introduced tonight that may have more of a wide coalition behind it? Or is this really just, hey, we've got to put this through, and even if we're on our own island here against developers or the mayor's office, that's just the way it is. We have not been able to secure any compromise.
Yeah. So I think what folks will see that we're introducing tonight, and it's already publicly available, and we've released the version we have, is really meant to take into account a lot of the feedback we were already hearing about rent stabilization. I hear in my neighborhood, I represent Ward 3, we have a lot of owner-occupied, duplexes and triplexes, and folks were telling us, hey, we actually already keep the rents affordable. We live in our properties. We live here. We take care of the building. We care about our the folks who live on the second and third floors, or whatever floors they live on. We're already doing this, so please don't include us in this, or if include our unique situation in this. So we've actually exempted we've exempted mom and pop properties from that. So if you're in a duplex or a triplex, you live in the building, you are exempted from that. So as we were crafting this, and as our policy team and the council president were crafting this, and they were really hands-on the whole time, really making sure we were looking at what worked well in other places, also what went poorly in other places. We don't want to step in anything that folks have already learned doesn't work. The goal with this is to stabilize the rents, but also understand what unique situation, what unique housing we have here in the city already. And so it does include some exemptions, some exceptions, things like that, to make sure that it is a policy that works and can be administered. And so I hope that gets us a larger coalition so we can have the 10-vote veto-proof majority we need to get this implemented in the city, but really try to take into account some of the concerns. And I know I've personally met with some of the developers to hear their concerns, to read. They were sending me PowerPoints and sharing Excel spreadsheets. And I always appreciate when people share actual real data with us, and with me in particular, so we could dig in on okay, what is your experience? What are some of the costs that come up that you need to deal with over time? Why would you need to raise rent over 4%? What are the things you're dealing with? And we really tried to incorporate a lot of that type of feedback into what we've introduced tonight.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things that is absolutely worth noting over and over again, I think, is that there are carve-outs here. Some people would be upset about that. They say, well, this needs to be a blanket. 4% is already too much. We can't, we should have absolutely no increases, for we should have some kind of moratorium. All of that stuff is great in theory, but what needs to happen now is action in practice, and that's going to require coalition building. So those carve-outs, for one example, if a property owner says, hey, wait a minute, I've invested X million dollars into this property, and now I really need to recover and recoup for this to stay afloat, that is a potential carve out. But let me ask you this, Councilor, because I think it's really important for Providence residents to hear this. What is your read right now on the appeal of setting up shop in Providence, either as an individual or as a family, when rents are, in particular, in this affordability crisis on the whole, but rents are so unpredictable and so unstable here in the city? I think this is, yes, there's proof in the pudding, but this is a psychological crisis that a lot of people are going, I don't know if I can find myself in a headspace where there's a future for me in Providence because of this. On a psychological level, how important is this for the city to pass?
I agree with that 100%, Bill. And I think that's really important to bring up because we talk a lot about, I think policymakers in general talk a lot about how we need predictability for business. Businesses need predictability. Human beings, our residents also need predictability. And there's so much chaos right now. And right now, folks don't know, like, hey, if I rent an apartment, am I going to be able to afford it next year? And moving is expensive. Moving is like monetarily expensive. It's psychologically expensive. It's from a time basis perspective, very expensive. Like it's hard to find a new place. And so you don't want to be continuously just having to like move every couple, every year, every couple months because you can't predict what your rent is going to be. And especially right now where the cost of everything is in such chaos, the jobs market is in such chaos, giving folks some level of predictability of saying, hey, we've got your back. Your rent price is something that you can rely on. And also that the quality of where you live is something you can rely on because we have built into it, that folks can and should be making upgrades to the house. We don't want the housing stock to degrade over time. We want to make sure that folks are living in high quality, places that they deserve to live in, that humans should be in. And so this should be something that folks in our city shouldn't have to be worried about, that they're not going to get pushed out, that they're not going to have to leave the city they love. I mean, I represent the Mount Hope neighborhood. And, we had urban renewal here many, decades ago. And we saw folks like, I have a resident who lives, actually, I won't say where he lives. He lives in my neighborhood now, but he told me like what parking space in the Whole Foods lot was where he was born and where he grew up. People have been pushed out of my neighborhood for generations, and they're getting pushed out now for new reasons. Renting an apartment on Camp Street is like $2,300 a month for one bedroom. That's insane. Like that shouldn't be the cost of a one bedroom anywhere, but folks who've been here for generations are getting pushed out, and you can't predict, like you can't budget for increases of 10, 15, 20%. You just can't do it. And so I think this is a very common sense way that will help people both psychologically and in their pocketbooks.
Yeah, I think that that's such a huge part of it. And look, what's tough right now is you look around the rental market as currently constituted. I mean, I'm seeing prices that are comparable to Brooklyn and Queens and even Manhattan and maybe not Harvard Square, but certainly even parts of Cambridge, Somerville. And that is distinctly not Providence. Providence is not any of those major cities. We don't have what those major cities have in terms of opportunity for making money straight up, and never mind any of the cultural or sort of excitement pieces. So I just think Providence has found itself as a shadow of itself, and it's not doing what Providence is intended to do in the ecosystem of the Northeast Corridor. And that's a major problem and unsustainable. And so from that standpoint, I wonder, have you had any conversations with the mayor? Is he movable on this? Is there anything that could move Brett Smiley into pro-rent stabilization from your standpoint?
That's a good question. And I just first want to validate what you just said. I mean, one of the best things about Providence is the diversity of our people. And like, this is a home for artists. This is a home for makers. It's a place where folks can graduate from Johnson Wales and start a James Beard award-winning restaurant with just a hope, like you can't do that if you're priced out of this city. Like we're going to see ourselves be a shell of ourselves if we just become a bedroom community for commuters going other places. That's not what Providence is. We're a little grittier. We're more artistic, we're makers, we're all sorts of things. And if folks can't live here, we're not going to be any of those things that make us really wonderful and great. I haven't talked to the mayor recently directly on this. I know he has said that he sees the way to get out of the housing crisis is to build. And I think many of us on council agree that we need to be building, building, building. And we've done things to facilitate that. We've upzoned large parts of the city through the zoning upgrades and the comprehensive plan. We've put money in the housing trust fund. I'm working on eliminating parking minimums in parts of the city to make building housing more affordable. So we're doing that, but that's not the only tool in the box, and it's not fast enough. People are hurting now. And so I'm hoping he's movable. I should call him directly, and I will. Thank you for that. And also, if he's not, we're going to get to 10 votes so that we have a veto-proof majority, because we have to do this, and the council is committed to getting this over the finish line. And out of the gate, we have 8 co-sponsors out of the gate, and that is sending a strong signal that a majority of us are sponsoring this. We only need 2 more to get us to a veto-proof majority.
You think any of the no's are movable? I know Councilor Taylor right now is the subject of a huge online Instagram campaign that's positioning him as, the kind of company town robber baron, coming in and just ruining everybody's lives. So there's already advocacy that is really direct after opponents of rent stabilization. Look, it's happening in real time. I don't know how effective that is actually going to be. But do you think from that standpoint, anybody's movable? They're going, wait a minute, people are going after me on this. Maybe I need to move on my position.
Yeah, I think some of the maybes are definitely thinking about it, which is exciting. So we've got, we at least have 8 yeses. And I think some of the folks who are thinking about it, I'm hoping that they'll come along, because we're seeing this is a big coalition of folks. It's not just a few folks asking for this. This is a large swath of the city, and it's from folks in every ward. I hear it in Ward 3. I know folks are hearing it in Ward 13 and in Ward 5 and 6, and I'm not going to name every 15 wards, but it's something that I'm just going to say all the numbers, but it's something we're hearing in every corner of the city. It's not just like a West Side problem or East Side or South Side or North End. It's the whole city. We're getting priced out. And so I'm hopeful, and I hope that the way that it's been thoughtfully written and crafted will show folks that this is, we're doing this in a thoughtful way. We're doing this in a way that will work, and that's taking into account the concerns that we're hearing in the community and from building owners. And I know I'll be talking with my colleagues about it as well over the next bit of time. And I think the advocacy is coming. There's like the Instagram advocacy, but we're also getting like real information, real contact from our voters, from our residents. So I'm hoping that's helpful as well. But I'm going to be doing the hard work of talking with my colleagues and making sure that we find areas where we can agree on this. And it will go through a whole process. So we'll have it go through the Hope Committee. There'll be a public hearing. I'm on the Hope Committee. I'm excited for hearing all that testimony. And we'll make, I'm sure we'll make some adjustments based on the concerns of my colleagues and concerns we hear from our residents. Nothing's perfect right out of the gate, but I think we got it pretty close. So I'm hopeful that this is better than what folks were expecting, and really learns from the example of other places and can come along. Yeah,
I think you're spot on there in terms of it's shown a scanning of other rent stabilized communities, and the pros and cons are available for anyone to kind of understand just by taking a look at the design of this ordinance, which has been, by the way, to your credit, revised several times over the last week. I've received, I think, 3 or 4 versions of it. So this is a fluid, living, breathing document. That's good. It's not just somebody's doctrine or dream that is a flat, hey, this is how it has to be. I think that this is a major moment for the city, and we'll see how if the mayor moves on it or if you get that supermajority. Councilor Sue AnderBois, also worth noting, a candidate for lieutenant governor, though not speaking in that capacity today, here on Bartholomew Town tonight at Providence City Hall. We'll see what happens, and we'll certainly continue to stay on this story here on the podcast and beyond. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you so much, Bill. Lovely to be with you.
Likewise, and we'll be right back after this. We appreciate all of our sponsors for their support of local journalism, including Half Street Group, who bring a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion We thank our sponsors for their support of local journalism, including Half Street Group, who bring a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience message and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation right here on Bartholomew Town every month, where we talk about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. You can learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Thanks for joining us here on Bartholomew Town. Remember, we are here for you every Tuesday and Thursday. And when breaking news events happen, you can also find us at ripodcast.com or wherever you get podcasts. I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk soon. Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.